I use he and him pronouns, and this meeting is being recorded. But I just want to welcome you all to our third informational webinar on the inaugural Portland Clean Energy Fund request for proposals or applications. It's taken quite a lot to get here. Volunteers certainly putting in thousands of hours when PCEF was just a ballot measure. Well over nearly 30 public committee meetings, thousands of staff hours, and public involvement in one-on-ones to get here. So we're really excited to get here. We're going to present a lot of information, but I just want to share that we're super excited to be here. We hope you all are too. But before we jump in, we're just going to do a little bit of a virtual participation check. Okay, next slide. All right, so we've got the chat box here for introductions. I know some folks have already begun doing that, but that's going to be open throughout the entire meeting, and we've got that there for introductions as well as questions during the meeting. And we will be monitoring those questions and taking a queue of all those questions. As we go through, if there are clarifying questions, we'll try to answer those right as we get them, but more substantive questions, I just want you all to know we're capturing those and we're going to answer those at the Q&A section at the end. If you want to actually verbally ask a question as opposed to using the chat box, please just raise your hand. And the way that you do that is at the bottom of your screen somewhere, there's usually a box that says participants. You click that box, and at the bottom of that, there's a thing that says raise hand. For those that are dialing in, and I don't know if we've got anyone dialing today, but to raise your hand, you just use *9 on your phone, and that will show us that you've got your hand raised. We are recording this meeting, as some folks just saw, and we've got captioning during the meeting as well. And if you need to see captions, there's usually a function somewhere at the bottom of your screen, either 3 dots or clicking more, and you should be able to say show subtitles or caption, and that'll let you see the captioning. In addition, we welcome, you will be muted throughout this meeting. We will unmute you if you've got your hand raised. But we do welcome folks, as if we were hosting this in person, we welcome you all to turn on your cameras if you want, if that works for you. Okay, next slide. So let's just start with a little introductions here. Before we jump in, we want to just start with having folks, I know some folks have already done this, write your name, your organizational affiliation, and a book or podcast you recommend in the chat box. And then while you all are doing that, we've got a poll for you here just to get a sense for who's with us and sort of how you're coming into this request for proposals or applications. So we can get just a little bit of information about those here with us today. Joe, are doing that. I'm just appreciating, and we will try to send out some of these podcasts and books that folks are reading, but appreciating some of the suggestions here. I feel like I've heard of Pod Save America and seeing it here. I'm like, now, okay, I've heard it a few times. I'll go check it out. Spillover, thank you for that suggestion. How I Built This, always a good one. Thank you. Okay, let's see. So thank you. So we've got about a fifth of you all here have read the RFP and have some specific questions. That's great. As we're getting in, we're almost at the halfway point for this request for proposal period. So it's great to see that. We've got about almost 60% of folks having read some of the RFP material and here to learn more. That's perfect, and that's great too. And we've got folks that haven't read any of the RFP material and here to learn, and that's just as well perfect. So thank you all for doing that. Okay, let's go to the next slide. So just want to start here with laying out our guiding principles. Now, the guiding principles was developed by the grant committee. The grant committee is a 9-person volunteer body that is going to be the body that makes the final funding recommendations around these grants to City Council. And so it's important to capture and understand these guiding principles. Now, the guiding principles are a set of principles designed to guide the program. The guiding principles describe the values by which the PCEF program is administered, and they complement our legislative code. This is the language that folks voted on as PCEF was made a reality back in 2018. And it also helps ensure that decisions are being made in a way that aligns with the vision and the values of the committee and the community. So as we've constantly gone back and we've had to answer additional questions and thought through, we often come back and check to these and say, does it align with our guiding principles? So these are just an important piece to understand the values that are captured within the program, in addition to the values that folks voted on in 2018. Okay, next slide. Just a quick overview and a reminder for folks. These numbers come specifically from the code, but this indicates the allocations that we expect to see over time. And about 40 to 60% of the fund will be invested in clean energy programs. These are energy efficiency and renewable energy projects that are happening on residences, so single-family homes that are happening in multifamily buildings, apartments, that are happening in schools and commercial properties. And so those are your weatherization projects, your solar projects, and others. So projects happening on buildings. The next big chunk of funds is 20 to 25%, and that goes towards contractor training and support, as well as workforce development. So this is about really diversifying the folks doing the work in these green careers, sustainability careers, these clean energy jobs. So we want to make sure that we are diversifying both the workforce and investing in organizations that are supporting diversifying the workforce, as well as diversifying our contractors working on these jobs and leading these jobs. Next biggest chunk is 10 to 15%, and that's going to go towards green infrastructure and regenerative agriculture. So these are your street trees, your green roofs, your bioswales, things that sequester carbon in soils, but as well as your urban agriculture, your urban farm plots, your community gardens. And then the last bucket is 5% innovation, and that's really things that don't otherwise neatly fall into these other categories, but do create greenhouse gas emission savings and create community benefit. Just as a note, year one allocation, and in this particular request for proposals or applications, we will be soliciting, and we have soliciting applications for a total funding availability of $8.6 million. In future years, we expect that to be closer to 40 to 60 million annually. Next slide. So just to start out, so that we set the stage so you know whether you're in the right place or not, is just who is actually eligible to apply for funds from the Portland Clean Energy Fund. And this is specifically in the code. So to apply, organizations have to be a nonprofit organization that is IRS tax exempt, registered with the state of Oregon, as well as not on the disqualified charities list. We do, and so those have to be the primary applicant, but we expect people to apply in partnership and certainly can apply in partnership with other nonprofits, with government, and with private businesses or for-profit entities. That said, there's going to also be, and there's a lot of intentionality within the committee to make sure that this fund was accessible for organizations that are just starting up. They have a nonprofit intent, but they're just starting up and haven't formally incorporated as a nonprofit. And so for those, they're going to often, we anticipate and expect them to apply through a fiscal sponsor, a nonprofit fiscal sponsor. And we have some guidelines around what are things folks need to think about in a fiscal sponsorship relationship. And we've got a link to that here, which actually reminds me, and I should have called this out. After this presentation, we will follow up with everyone that's registered for this presentation with an email link to this PowerPoint in a PDF. So all of these links you see here, you'll be able to access in an email that we follow up with. Additionally, any questions that you state, we are capturing all those questions, and if we don't answer them here today, we've got a question and answer section of our website where we are weekly updating questions, and we'll see that in a little bit. All right, next slide. So this slide just gets a little bit more specific. It lines up with the funding allocations you saw a couple of slides before, but this really gets more narrow and specific to the 8.6 million we have available this year. So you'll see, related to this, what we have available this year, we're anticipating to see about 3.5 to 5 million in clean energy projects, about 1.5 to 2.1 million in workforce and contractor development projects, as well as almost up to about 1.5 million, 1.3 million in green infrastructure, sustainable ag projects, and then within that, what you'll see is we've got specifically, those are the funding categories overall, but you can apply for a planning grant, a small grant, or a large grant. And this diagram, which is also on our website, shows that planning grants will be up to $100,000 each. We've got an initial allocation of at least 1.5 million set aside for planning grants. And then small grants can be up to 200,000 and large grants can be up to $1 million. Okay, next slide. We show this slide mainly to say that this application, this RFP that we have for you builds on the original community vision. You know, the initiative was launched in 2018. We had our full grant committee seated just a little less than a year ago in November 2019. A lot of public engagement throughout that process. and continual public engagement in the development of our guiding principles. Those were approved in April 2020. And then we worked through that period in time, we worked on the grant application and the scoring criteria, which we released to the public in June of 2020 for public comment. Went through a rigorous public comment process, got well over 100 comments from individual or commenters from individual different organizations, incorporated that feedback and released this RFP on September 16, 2020. So just a little bit under a month ago. And it'll be open until November 16th, 2020. We have a little bit over a month to go. And then we anticipate going through a review process after it closes and eventually awarding grants in February 2021 with those going to City Council. Okay, next slide. And maybe I'll just acknowledge, and I didn't there, is that this is our first year. We're going to learn a tremendous amount in this first year. So we anticipate after that going through another community process and gearing up for our next solicitation after we award the first set of grants. All right, so what we're going to start with here before we jump into some of the content is just get a sense for, what sort of grants folks are interested in here. So you see here just a little bit of explanation around planning grants, small grants, and large grants. And we just want to get a sense for what you're thinking about, as well as what kind of experience you have coming into this around applying for grants. So you're going to see a poll here shortly. Let's see. You got 60% of you vote answering the poll. We're going to wait for a couple more here, and then we'll close it out. Okay. Thank you. So what you see here, and this is great to see, and I think we've seen a little variation, but generally this has been somewhat consistent with what we've seen in our other webinars. A little bit skewed, but there's been interest across both all the planning, small and large grants. So it's great to see, and it's similarly we've got a varying level of experience around folks with applying to the grants. So this is also great, and this is it's just to emphasize you're in the right place. All right, next slide. So we're going to go through here for this next bit before we really jump and pivot over to your questions that you might have about the RFP. Is we're going to go through how you navigate the actual application process from the website and where you get the content that you need to submit successful or an application, and ideally all the materials you need to review so that you can be successful in your application. All right, next slide. So what you see here is this is sort of the landing page and the guide to the PCEF grant application process. I hope that most of you have come to this webinar because you've seen this page, but this really is the first page, and so there's a link here. We'll send this out, but it's the first page that you should start on and really review everything that you should read this page in its entirety before moving on to the next steps. Next slide. Because what you see is that we've got a table of contents here that lists all the basic information that you need to be thinking about in terms of eligibility, the PCEF priority populations that are called out within and prioritized within our scoring, the funding categories, the specific grant types, the eligible uses of funds and things that you can't use them for, as well as just what the application review process will look like. And this is also where we host a handful of PDFs around translations of this grant guide into about 9 languages. So as you think about community partners that may need this, this is an important place to send them as well. Next slide. Linked to the top right-hand section of this page, you'll see we've got questions about PCEF, the PCEF grants. This is where we are holding all the questions that come up through the webinars, through our one-on-ones, through email. As we respond to those questions, as those questions raise things that we haven't answered somewhere else, we are capturing those responses here. We update this weekly on Wednesdays. And so as you go through this guide itself, it's important that you check in on the questions to see if there's a question you have, it may be answered here. So this is just going to be an important place to also check in. And this is where we're making additions and noting additional information that may not have been answered elsewhere in this RFP packet. Okay, next slide. This next link here just points to webinars. So you're in one of our webinars now, but we've got links to all of our previous webinars as well as recordings from those previous webinars. So you can always jump back there to see another session or just chime back in to see, you know, in a week from now or so, what was recorded in this session. Additionally, we've got training and technical assistance events listed here. So these are our grant writing workshops as well as our budget development workshops that we are hosting in order to help folks get some training and thinking about what they need to be thinking about as they develop and draft their grants as well as their budgets. Next slide. We've got a link here for just additional resources, and this is just a summation or compilation of just a handful of basic information that may be helpful. This isn't exhaustive, but it's an initial set of resources that we wanted to provide for folks. And then next slide points to our definitions page. And this is a page where we host our definitions. You know, I will acknowledge that, and I've said this in other places, that when the folks thought about PCEF, it was meant to address some of our complex issues. And so there's a lot of definitions as we reference different terms. And so it'll be an important place to come back to and check in on if you want to understand what a word says. But one particular one here that we want to call out is our definition for priority populations. Specifically, these are priority populations called out within the PCEF legislation or our code. And it says that there are two sets of really priority populations. For clean energy, green infrastructure, and regenerative agriculture projects, the priority populations are people of color and people with low income. And it really isn't and, it's really people of color or people with low income. And for workforce development and contractor support projects, the priority populations are a little wider. It's women, people of color, people with disabilities, and people who are chronically underemployed. Next slide. So once you've had a chance to fully work your way through that initial guide that lays out all the basic information you need to know about this RFP, there's a couple links throughout there that are what you're going to click to actually go and apply for a PCEF grant and move into that next phase. So what you see here is that next phase, you're going to need to decide, are you applying for a planning, a large, or a small grant? And this gives you a little bit of guidance around what you may, a little bit of guidance so you may be able to answer what you're thinking about applying to. And you can apply to multiple planning grants, multiple small grants, or large grants. So there's not a limitation. They just need to be distinct projects. Next slide. And once you've decided what kind of grant you're going to apply for, you're going to scroll down and you're going to actually begin to prepare your application. So it's really important that you go to any one of these links, whether it's a planning, small, or large grant. And we'll go through a little bit more detail in a little bit around what's in those. But what this does is these links will send you to another folder. And you'll have the option to, at the upper left-hand corner, select download all the files. What that'll do is it'll let you download a zip folder of all the files you need to prepare your application. And it's important you start there so that you get a sense for all the material and things. And we'll go through what's in those files in a little bit, but that's an important place to start. And I should just acknowledge before we move on, if you need paper copies of any of these materials, you can email us, and there's a link there at the bottom of our email. We're more than happy to send out any paper copies of any of these materials that you need. Okay. Next slide. And then the last step as you get ready to submit your application is go to our application portal. It's an online portal, and I've got to stress here that it really is a portal for you to just input your information that you've drafted. So we recommend folks work in Microsoft Word, somewhere else in another place, whether it's Word, Google Docs, somewhere else to develop all your answers. Then you come and you actually populate it into the application portal itself. And we prefer that folks and we recommend that folks use the application portal. So since it eases our administration review of the answers. But if folks want, you are also welcome to submit your application materials either by mail or by email as well. And with that, I'm going to pass this on so you can stop hearing from me to my esteemed colleague, Katie Lister. Go for it.
Hi, can you all hear me? Okay, I'm Katie Lister. I use she, her pronouns. I'm on the PCEF startup team. And before we get into this, into the next set of slides, there was just one quick question that was kind of a clarifying question in the chat box, and that was from Violetta, who is asking, when choosing the type of grant, should we think about the total needed or just the amount of the request? And so just think it's just the amount of the PCEF funding request that you would be thinking about when choosing between a small or a large grant. Okay, so I'm going to go a little bit deeper into the RFP material. And so that the button that Sam had a screenshot of a couple of slides ago, where you choose whether you're going to apply for a planning grant, a small grant, or a large grant, when you click that and you open up, it opens up a new window where you can download all of the files in the form of a zip file, or you can download them individually. And this is kind of what it will look like. And it's different. It's a different set of documents for planning grants, small grants, and large grants. So the screenshot is on the screenshot here. Kind of has an example of all of those: large at the top, small at the bottom, and planning or small in the middle, planning at the very bottom. There are a number of documents that are the same across all of them, but there are some subtle differences, and then there are some significant differences. So we really recommend that you download the whole packet and keep those separate from each other if you're considering applying for more than one type of grant, which you are allowed to do. So first, we just wanted to kind of go into, let you know what's in the required attachments document or the required attachments folder. And I'll be going into a little bit more detail about those particular documents a little bit later on. But within that folder, for small and large grants, you'll see 3 documents, 2 Excel files and 1 PDF. The PDF is called Attachment A, and that just lists all of the information that is needed that you need to include in your project description and scope narrative. It's not a fillable PDF, so it's not something you need to download, fill out, and upload. It just is something that you need to download and understand and incorporate into your application. The other 2 documents are fillable Excel files, and those you do need to download, fill out, and then upload. One is a budget template, and the other one is a milestones and activities template. If you're applying for a planning grant, there's no attachment A, so you won't see that inside that folder. So when you first open up the file, before you go into the required attachments or the resources folder, there are three documents that are on the outside of that file structure. The first is an application checklist, and that is just to make sure once you've assembled all of your materials, it just is sort of a reminder to go back through and check and make sure that you've done everything that you need to do to complete the application. If you use the online application portal, that function is automated. So it'll flag if you have a section of your application that is not complete. The second one is well, I don't know if they're necessarily in this order, but that is just a PDF of all of the application questions. Again, this is not fillable. It's just for reference for you to use so that you can know what all of the questions that you'll need to be able to answer to fill out your application is. And then the last one is something called an application questions guidance document. And that document is not necessarily intended to be read top to bottom. It's really more a reference for if you kind of get stuck on a question, or you're not really sure what we're after, or you're looking for examples, or you're wondering why we're asking the question, then go to the application questions guidance, and there's guidance on every single question. You can kind of cross-reference them by the number of the question, by how the question is numbered. And then, there might be, I think there's a couple questions in the large application grant in particular where you need to do a little math, and it'll show you exactly how that gets done. So that's what's on the outside of the file structure. And inside of the resources folder, there are just a number of different documents that kind of help you understand One, how the program is evaluating different criteria. So for example, in the greenhouse gas impact document, that shows how the program will be evaluating greenhouse gas impact for that particular scoring criterion. It's not necessary for you to read that or to understand it. Staff is going to be doing that evaluation for the sake of consistency for all of the applications. It's just there for the purposes of transparency and if you're interested. But there are a number of documents in that folder that have really critical information to help applicants understand what they will need to agree to should they be awarded funds. So the wage requirements document is a really important one to look into that applies to all grant types, and that kind of outlines the requirement that all staff be paid 180% of minimum wage, and then some information around prevailing wage requirements for certain types of projects. There's also reporting requirements, a sample grant agreement, and workforce and contractor equity agreement. Those are all documents that are important to understand to know what you will be required to do should you be awarded funding. And I just want to call out for folks who are interested in applying for a clean energy project, so for an energy efficiency or renewable energy project, the document that is called Clean Energy Project Requirements does have information about some sets of circumstances or project types where we might be requiring third-party verification and of implementation of different types of projects, and that needs to be a part of your grant application and needs to be worked into your budget and into your work plan. So important to kind of understand a lot of the information that is available in the resources packet. So this first, so now I'm just, the next sort of set of slides just goes into a little bit more detail about some of the documents that are in the required attachment folder. And so the first is the application questions. It's pretty straightforward. We just wanted to show you a screenshot of kind of what the, you know, on the left-hand side, what the first page of the PDF looks like. You can see kind of all of the questions. This is for the large grant application, for which there are sort of 7 sections of questions. And then you can see on the right-hand side, there's a screenshot of what the online portal looks like. So it's exactly the same questions, and they're just sort of how you answer them and where you put them into the portal. Attachment A, and again, this only applies to small and large grants. But this is information, again, that needs to be included in the narrative section of your project description and scope. And the thing that we want to point out here is that if you do have a proposal that includes more than one project type, for example, if you have a project that includes both energy efficiency and renewable energy measures, then you'll need to look at what the information requirements are for both of those project types and make sure that you're kind of hitting all of the applicable pieces of information and incorporating those into your project description and scope. I will say that this screenshot makes it look like a slightly heavier lift than I feel like it actually is. A lot of these, once you read through them, are pretty straightforward. It's like number of buildings, you know, I mean, sort of estimated energy savings, the sort of standard stuff that you would anticipate seeing for these types of projects. The next slide has a screenshot of the budget template, and this is the budget template for large and small grants. The planning grant budget template is a little bit simpler and does not include a separate tab for a leverage table. So leverage funding or in-kind contributions there's no points available for those for planning grants, and so it's just not included. But it is included for small and for large grants. And so there are 3 tables within the budget template. Just kind of want to make sure that folks know that those are all there and know that they need to fill them out. The cells that are shaded are not intended to be filled in. Some of them have formulas in them, others of them are descriptive. They should be locked, but if you are clever, as many people are, and know how to unlock an Excel spreadsheet, just know that those aren't supposed to be edited. Just put information into the cells that don't have any shading in them. So here, this slide just has some kind of budget tips and reminders. And the first one, just right up top, I think is the most important to us as a program, and that is that we just really want applicants to budget for what they need. Oftentimes in competitive application processes, folks feel like they need to submit as skinny a budget as they possibly can. And PCEF is not a lowest cost wins program. We really want programs to think about what they'll need to be able to be successful in meeting their goals and work all of that into their budget. For folks who are new to doing construction projects, we just wanted to kind of put a note in there that we definitely want you to include a contingency in your construction budget. That's standard. Generally 5 to 10% is kind of a standard contingency on most construction budgets. So just want to remind people that they should include that in their budget. And then this last one feels like it's a little bit complicated or feels a little convoluted to explain, but I'm going to give it a shot. If your project is multi-year, you just really want to make sure that you are budgeting enough money to meet the wage requirements in each of the years. So for example, if your budget or if your project is 2 years long, you'll need to make sure that all of the staff who are being paid using PCEF funds in the first year are making 180% of minimum wage. But that minimum wage requirement is tied to a state statute, which is updated every fiscal year. And in the wage requirements document in the packet of information that you download, there's a link to how you can calculate that. It's relatively straightforward. And I think we included the amounts for the next 3 years, so you can just pull those out of there. But you just will want to make sure that everyone has that increase in their wage worked into the budget for year 2, or if you have even a large grant, if you have a 5-year project, that it's worked into the budget all the way through. And then just a note to pay attention to the caps. There are some caps, and those again are in the budget template. There are formulas in there which should flag for you if you have exceeded a cap. But just to make sure that people are understanding them too, there is a 20% cap on overhead costs. If you are applying with a fiscal sponsor, there's a 10% fiscal sponsor fee cap. And if you are applying with a fiscal sponsor, the combination of your overhead and the fiscal sponsor fee cannot exceed 25%. The total construction budget on non-energy related building improvements, and that's so generally for renewable energy and energy efficiency projects, so might not apply to everyone, but the cap on those non-energy related building improvements is 30% of the total construction budget. And they do need to be life, health, safety related, and like no quartz countertops for 30% of the construction budget. And then just the last bullet is sort of in response to inquiries that we've gotten. Just wanted to make sure that folks did know, and this is there's more detail about this in the sample grant agreement in the application packet, that grantees can be paid through either reimbursement or through partial advance option. And that will be kind of negotiated with PCEF staff once awards are made to, work out a system that works for the grantee. We don't want to cause anybody cash flow issues. This next slide, I'm not going to go into too much detail on these. This is in the, there's more detail on this list that on the kind of landing page on our website on the that is the guide to applying for a PCEF grant. And so the link to that is at the top of this slide. But I just I'm pulling it out here kind of as we're talking about budget, just to make sure that folks are aware of some of the uses of funds that are eligible, that might not be typically eligible in climate-related granting programs, so that folks are aware that of what is allowed, and also a little bit of what is limited, and so that folks can be encouraged to think creatively about how they're going to meet their environmental, racial, and social justice goals and work those costs into their budgets. I think a couple of things that just to point out here, because well, I guess just one kind of overarching statement, and this comes up a lot when we talk about land acquisition, or it has come up in the past, but just for all of these things, for all of the allowable expenses, they need to be tied to a project that addresses climate change and advances racial and social justice. So, you know, land acquisition is listed as an eligible cost, but it needs to be land acquisition that is directly part of a project cost that addresses climate change and advances racial and social justice. Sorry, I got distracted by the chat box. Attachment C is the last attachment in that required in the required documents folder, and that is the milestones and activities. We have these sort of definitions of milestone and activities. A milestone is a significant marker in a project that indicates completion of a major event, decision point, stage, or goal. And activities describe the grant-funded activity that will help you achieve that milestone. This is the one place in the application process that we're asking for an estimate of schedule. So we are asking for a start date and an end date associated just with the upper level milestones. So make sure that you kind of think about those and put those in there. I also kind of would note that within the definition of milestone, there are a couple of terms that are a little bit subjective, significant, and major. It's really up to you all to decide what you think is significant in your project and what you think is major in your project. And something to keep in mind as you're filling this out is that in addition to kind of the standard reporting requirements that the program will have for all grantees, it's likely that this document, these milestones and these activities and tasks that you list here will likely become will be incorporated into what you will be reporting on. So I think that's good to think about as you're thinking about what you're listing there. And this is the application portal. And so we just wanted to note a couple of things here. You will have to sign up for an account. It's very easy to be able to access the application portal. And in order to work, you can save information and then come back to it, but only one account can be associated with that application. So if you have multiple people working on an application, then you're going to need to share login information, and only one of you can be in the document or in the portal at a time saving information. Otherwise, you might save over each other. So it kind of reinforces maybe the point that Sam made earlier, which is that submitting information into the application portal, we really recommend that be your last step, that you work in whatever kind of platforms, a Word document or Google Docs or Excel or whatever that you're comfortable in kind of developing all of your material. And then once you have it all developed, go to the portal and kind of enter it after that. Make sure, do the spell check in Word and then put it into the application portal afterwards. You might lose some of your formatting, but no, that won't impact your score at all. And then kind of hiding behind that login screenshot is just a screenshot of a pretend dashboard. And we put this up here because we just wanted to let folks see that you can have more than one application in process at a time. Like this pretend example has somebody who is applying for 2 planning grants and a small grant. So you can have multiple projects or applications in process and then continue those. I would note that once you submit your application, you cannot go back into it and edit it. So just make sure that you're done before you hit the submit button. And then this is just an example from the small grants. Again, it's pretty straightforward. I think we hope very easy to navigate and to submit your information into. has each of the sections for your grant application on the left-hand side here. For the small, large, and planning, those will be slightly different sections between the grants, and the questions will also obviously be a little bit different. For folks who are applying for large grants, and to a lesser extent small grants, you'll notice if you've looked at the application questions that there are some skip patterns. When you apply through the application portal, that function is automated. So depending on how you answer the questions, you will either be able to answer some questions or not, or able to answer other questions. So application portal tips and reminders, again, that this is the last step. We really want folks to download and review all of the material and complete their applications before they get started in the portal. We strongly recommend that you work up all of your material beforehand and then just cut and paste your responses into the appropriate fields. You can apply for multiple grant projects under one account. Save your application from time to time, just like with anything, so that you don't lose your material. And again, if you're sharing login information, you can't use the application portal at the same time. It will let you. So, if you both are sort of saving things at the same time in the same section, it could erase someone's work and overwrite it with someone else's work. So that sort of needs to be coordinated with your staff. And those are all of our slides. And so now I'd just like to invite folks to put questions into the chat box. If you want to say your question out loud, just go ahead and raise your hand and we can call on you. And I'm going to open up a document that has where we're keeping track of questions. A lot of stuff going on my screen. Sorry, guys.
I'll read it off if it helps, Katie.
Okay.
You got it?
Okay, that would be great.
Also, yeah, we have a question from Katya.
Hi.
Great. Okay.
Can you all hear me?
Sorry about that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Sorry. I think it's just easier if I was trying to type out the question. I think it might be just easier if I say it. I'm a little confused. So typically in past grants that we apply for, there's like, we're funding multiple projects under one grant. And especially for a grant like this, that's like multi-year, we can get a lot done, So I guess I'm confused. Is it one application per project? Can there be multiple phases of projects under one grant? We're still not sure if we should be applying for a small or a large grant because we don't know. Yeah, just can you kind of define that a little bit? Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good question. Sam, do you want me to take the first go with that? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, Katya, I think that you can absolutely, so from our perspective, each application will be a project, but I mean, this is sort of like the definition of project is not, is not particularly clear. It means different things to different people. You can absolutely bundle projects together and submit it in one application. I think if you have a good sense of work that you want to be doing over multiple years, it probably makes sense to go for a larger grant application. Yeah, I'm not sure actually that there's much else that I would add to that, except there was a question in there about phases. And I guess the only caveat that I can think of is that if one of the phases included a fair amount of planning, and that would kind of lead to a somewhat unknown work in the future, that it might make sense to apply for a planning grant to get that work done first, so that you would have a better sense of the budget and things like and timeline for the future work. But yeah, I think
I can clarify a little bit what I meant by that.
Yeah.
So we have some projects currently going on that we need funding to finish. So there's some things that are like already on their way. And then at the same time, we're trying really hard to take a pause and do a like sort of needs assessment and reimagine, you know, like how we actually choose sites and doing like a larger overlook of picking sites. And so that is more planning. And I remember asking this question a while back because that is planning, but then, you know, that won't take very long. And then we hope to use funding to actually implement some of these projects. And so to me, that's like a small planning portion of a larger implementation of multiple projects on the ground. And so I don't know, like, do I need like a separate application for that small planning part? And then the small grant is like the actual project. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I think what I would chime in and share there is, I mean, I would take a look at both the application questions, the small and large grant application questions. And if there are questions you can answer, and the planning is to help decide to tease out a little bit of the nuance, but you generally have a sense of what the work is and you can answer those questions. I think that can shed a little bit of light if you go that approach. I mean, we don't anticipate everyone to know everything about their projects if they're implementing and they're going for a small and large grant. Such, for instance, if you're going to do a weatherization program, we don't expect you to know every single home you're going to go into and do that work. We need to know generally what's your approach, what is the type of scope, what are you going to do in each of these homes, but we don't need to know exactly which homes and how you're targeting those folks. So there's some of that basic information. So I think if you have enough of that basic information and you know the work you want to do and you can answer the questions, I think that may be able to that may provide your answer, Katya.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, thank you. Thank you both.
All right, Jason, I do see that your hand is up, but maybe you can answer just a couple of the questions from the chat box that came in first. So one was a clarification on people of color and low income. Does it mean that priority will be given to low-income people of color? So that is for the priority populations. It's a lot of P's. Is people of color and or low-income people, and so there is not a preference. There's no additional points for combining those two priority populations, if I'm understanding the question correctly. And those again are for clean energy, regenerative agriculture, and innovation projects and green infrastructure projects. For workforce development and contractor support projects, it's a more expansive list. There's a question from, maybe just one more question before, and then we'll go to Jason, from Heath Kearns. To be sure on building improvements, if a building needs a new roof before installing solar, is it acceptable to wrap that cost into the grant application? That would be, so that would be it, as long as, so it would be up to 30% of the total construction budget. That would be the cap for the non-energy related construction costs. But certainly a new roof would fall into the category of being a life, health, safety issue if it was required to be able to support the solar installation. So, Jason?
Yeah, thanks everyone for your time and providing this great session for feedback and also this time to ask a lot of questions. One in particular, we had a great conversation yesterday with Growing Gardens team about this, and I guess I just kind of wanted to pose this question and see what's possible. And I was also maybe then just assuming that this was you all doing this, but I also wanted to get clarification on that. So this is an opportunity to have a lot of cross collaboration. And so wondering, is there an entity or an organization looking at convening all of these resources so that, and let's just take an example, one homeowner maybe needs to get some solar, retrofit or something, but also could then benefit from getting a home garden from our program. And then maybe if Friends of Trees applies, getting trees at their home. So instead of it being haphazard of like, oh, this one person just got this one resource because they just needed solar, how can we then couple this together and kind of boost or exponentially increase the amount of resources that folks are getting based on this program. So I don't know if that's like a brochure or something, but how do we convene or share all these resources amongst, and I'll just start with just the folks who get the grants, to then ensure that everyone's kind of getting this full menu or full opportunity across the board. So just kind of a question, kind of a thought question of that, of what, is that someone doing that? Is that y'all at PCEF? Is that no one? Is that a possibility?
I'll maybe take this one. I think currently right now we don't have a plan for that per se. I think there is a planning effort that after we award grantees, we're going to be teasing out what are the co-learning opportunities, what are the opportunities to bring folks together, and because there may be synergies, whether it's just a learning opportunity and a networking opportunity. So at present, leading up and through the deadline for this RFP, we don't have anything like that planned. I think that is and a big part of that is just we're building everything as we go. So I know that that's something we've been thinking about in terms of future years around sort of creating those networking opportunities, whether those happen just even within individual sectors to create that learning opportunity. But we don't have that currently planned. I will acknowledge though, I suspect that there are some folks that are probably working on more collaborative grant applications that may involve some of those. So there's nothing to prevent folks from getting together and pulling together a grant application and speaking to those connections. But we as staff are not necessarily doing that, not particularly we are not doing that specifically, and we're not doing that before this deadline. But it's something it's something that I think we've discussed around how we create some of that learning opportunity or synergy opportunity.
So we have another question from Violetta, which is who reads, scores the grants, and who has ultimate decision-making power for who gets funded? And maybe we actually, I think it's still there. Yes. We actually have a slide about this. So hopefully that slide is visible to y'all now. And this is the grant review process. There is an eligibility screening. And staff does that. And that's just like very basic eligibility, making sure that it's an eligible project type and you're an eligible applicant. And then there is a technical review. The technical review applies to projects that have physical improvements. And that is not a technical review where we are scoring or looking for, everybody to be experts, and be only using sort of like documented best practice. It really is a screening to say, is this project technically feasible? And if it is technically feasible, then it gets passed on to a scoring panel. The scoring panels will be made of 5 people, and they'll be comprised of probably 2 staff people, 2 committee members, PCEF grants committee members, and then 1 additional person. And every panel will also have a subject matter expert and will be majority BIPOC and have gender balance. So that's our sort of scoring panel makeup. And then the scoring panels will first do all of their scoring individually, and then provide that information and ask any clarifying questions if they're confused about something in the application. And then staff will take an average of their individual scores on each criteria along with the clarifying questions and send those along with a response form to the applicants, so the applicants have an opportunity to respond on the form. So it's a relatively short response. It's we're not going to be, allowing any additional information, sort of like supplemental information to be provided, but definitely responding and answering clarifying questions. That information goes back to the scoring panel, and then each of the scoring panels will be convened and to discuss the applicant feedback, discuss their scores with each other. They'll have an opportunity to change their scores then if they want to, and then a final score will be determined at that scoring panel meeting. Those scores will then be sent to the full grant committee, and the full grant committee they're the ones who will ultimately make recommendations for a packet of grant funding and send that on to City Council. And City Council are the ones who ultimately approve the funding packet and and then the awards can be made. So I think that covered everything. It covered the process. And then, so the next question is, Sam, I think that this is one for you. Oh, it's just, please, from Michael Heumann, please clarify Sam's statement that the total amount for planning grants will be at least 1.5 million. If there are many qualifying grants, will more funding be allocated?
Yeah, so essentially the committee, this 1.5 million allocation was an allocation that was set by the PCEF committee. And they wanted to set that in large part to send a clear signal that they want to fund planning grants. And they recognize that particularly Black and brown communities have not had the benefit of having resources to plan. And so that was the clear intention in setting that signal. So it's to say that there will be at least 1.5 million set aside for planning grants. If we get more than 1.5 million in planning grant proposals, they can certainly fund more. They will be scored they'll be scored just like the other proposals. And so it really functions to how they're going to rank amongst the other projects. So there's nothing saying that it is just 1.5 million. It can be more than that, but you'll see at least that much, assuming we get that much in planning grant proposals, you'll see at least that much, that much in planning grants funded. Hopefully that helps, Michael. Okay.
Okay, so the next question is from Jason, and this is a meaty one. So is there a conflict of interest if applying for PCEF funds to then partner with a different city agency? For example, if we apply for PCEF to work with the city Parks and Rec Community Garden Program to build a new garden and have in the budget that city agency will get these funds, what is the estimated amount of time, and then maybe just an unrelated additional question, what's the estimated amount of time to fill out this application? So the first question, I think, is about, can you have funds, can you budget to be able to pay city bureaus or entities for things that that the city would typically charge for? And so the answer to that is yes, you can do that. We as staff and the committee and certainly the community have kind of a keen eye and are to making sure that these funds are being used in a way that is driven by the community and are not being used to pay for city services. That would be against the law. But if it is something that the community wants to do and they would need to pay a fee or like a rent or something like that, typically, then that is an allowable expense under the grant.
Yeah. A perfect example of that, for instance, is many of these projects are going to need to get permits. And those are fees anyone has to pay for to access, and those do go to the city. So permit fees are very much eligible fees. Yeah.
So then the second part of that question is, what is the estimated amount of time needed to fill out this application? And that is a good question. I think that it depends on how far along you are in planning your project. I mean, I think that the lion's share of most grant application processes is really just figuring out how you're going to do the work. Once you have figured that out, I would have a very hard time estimating how many hours it would take to actually complete the application. We do offer word count guidance in the application question document. So for each application question in, I think it's purple, parentheses, you'll see a suggested word count. Those are in no ways hard rules on either end. If you feel like you can tell us what you need to tell us in fewer words, or if you feel like you need more words to tell us what you need to tell us, that is absolutely allowable. And, being outside of those parameters won't impact your score negatively or positively. So if you follow those guidelines, I think when we counted up, the large grant, the large grant word count for the suggested, it was around, gosh, I can't remember. Sam, can you remember? I want to say it was around like 12 to 15 pages.
I think that's right. We made adjustments, but I remember that was one of the early numbers I remember. One of the latter numbers.
Yeah. So that's kind of on the high end because it's for large grants, and it's for a large grant, assuming that you have a single site construction budget over 500,000. So there's like, you're answering as many of the questions as would be required for that type of project.
Yeah, and substantially less for a planning grant.
Yes, definitely.
The one question, Katie, I want to answer that I think was in Jason's that I want to make sure you capture. Jason, you asked in there, and I'm scrolling back up to it, and I've missed it. But you asked something. Oh, you asked about another city. I want to make sure you weren't asking about other city agencies outside of the city of Portland. I just wanted to be clear, and maybe Jason, that could be a nod. These funds, just to make sure that's clear, these funds do for anything that is being built, any infrastructure that is being built, whether it's a garden, whether it's investments into a building, they need to take place within the city of Portland. For any investments in workforce, in people, in training people, and educating people, those need to be invested in residents of the city. That said, you could have a program that has 70% City of Portland residents, 30% City of Gresham residents. It would just be, we would pay for the proportional pieces associated with the City of Portland residents. So
the next question is from Trin, and that is it possible if we apply for a large grant and are approved for the small grant amount? And for this funding round, we are not considering reducing the amount of funding. We are going to take grant applications with the budgets that they are submitted and the project descriptions that they have included in them and evaluate them and sort of either fund them for the requested amount or not. The only thing, I guess the only thing that I would note is that it's possible if there was, if there was a requirement that through the scope negotiation, if there was an additional requirement that the city had for the grantee that wasn't included in their application, that was relatively small, we might add a little bit of money just to cover that cost. But we don't anticipate downsizing or downscoping of projects in this first funding round. The next question is from Stephen Achilles, and that is, we are growing a recycling program. Showing the environmental impact of recycling is challenging and dependent upon assumptions about future use. Will such a program be considered?
What I will acknowledge there, maybe just off the, I mean, that sounds like it'd be an innovation project. So maybe just to state clearly that it doesn't, I don't necessarily, unless we can, unless I missed a piece of it, that would probably fall within the innovation bucket. And so it comes down to sort of the merits of it in terms of, is there GHG emissions reductions? Whether we the degree to which we can quantify that is something that we will be connecting back with our staff that's going to be quantifying that. But it's a question of, are there GHG emissions reductions associated with the project, and does it create those community benefits?
Yeah, and I guess the only thing that I would add to that is that it depends. Like if it is a recycling program that is really a workforce development and training program, then then it does need to have environmental benefit, but there's not a GHG impact score associated with it. So that one. And then, so question from Jason, how much of the funds can be used as education, community outreach to increase urban agriculture? And there is no cap on the amount of funds that can be used for education or community outreach. So as much as you think is needed. A question from Michael. Please clarify, is there any expectation of matching funds that would be contributed by the family or household receiving the energy work being done on their home if they are BIPOC but above the poverty guidelines? There is not, and there is not that expectation. think that that might be all of the questions.
We're gonna hang here for a little while, but I don't know if this would be an appropriate time to, before we lose people on the call, to do our final survey before we lose them, and then we're still here. So we would love it if you can just answer a handful of questions so we can see, was this webinar helpful? And after hearing all this, how likely are you to apply? And Michael, I see your hand, we see your hand raised. We'll call on you here in a second. Okay. Michael, go for it with the question. Oh, let's see. We got to unmute you.
I'm unmuted. Thank you. I appreciate all of this. Your expertise, your dedication, the effort you've put into this is absolutely phenomenal and appreciated. And what I have now is just a nerdy question. And so please bear with me on this nerdy question. In a certain sense, Katie, you kind of addressed it, but anyway, let me go with it. On the planning grant, the application questions, talking about the word counts, on page, this is really detailed, on page 10 of 13, where it says 3.2 planning process, the suggested purple is 500 to 1,000 words. And then you scroll down and under 3.2b, it said 100 to 300 words. My question is that 100 to 300 a subset, intended to be a subset of the 500 to 1,000, or are they separate counts? It's nerdy, I apologize.
Okay, Michael, I'm gonna open that document real quick, just so I am making sure that I am looking at the same thing you're looking at.
Sure.
This is the planning grant application, right?
Correct, and it's starting on the word count starts on page 10 under 3.2 planning process.
Mm-hmm.
And it's 500 to 1,000 words. That seems like that would be for all of 3.2, but down below, there's a 3.2b that's 100 to 300 words. So I don't know if that's intended to be, and I know it's not important, but is that intended to be a subset of the total, or is that a separate and additional?
That is actually a separate and additional, and I can see how that is confusing because of where the purple is. Yep. So this 500 to 1,000 words really should be, it's the scope. It's everything that's in the scope. And then the 100 to 300 words is just zeroing in on if there are any known potential challengers or barriers to success.
Thank you. It's a clarification. It may not just be only for me, but for others as well. But I appreciate that. And we certainly don't want to run on too long, but we also don't want to be overly constrained. And you explained it. So thank you.
Okay. Yeah, no problem. And we, as many people and as many hundred times as we looked at these documents, we still had a couple of things that you all are finding.
You guys are awesome. You have covered so much. I hope everybody appreciates this. Yeah, it's just amazing.
Well, we are excited to see what projects folks are thinking about.
Okay. Just seeing some of the results here. Okay. It's good to know. It's good to know it's good to know folks are still eager and very likely to apply.
You haven't scared us off yet.
All right, we're gonna sit here and just be around in case any questions come up for a little while longer before we close out. But we will follow up with an email. There will be a recording of this webinar as well as a link to this PDF or this presentation that you all have gone through here today. And if any other questions come up, just please email us, get in touch, and we'll make sure to respond back as soon as we can. See, we've got a question here from Stephen Achilles. I'm just going to read it out. We are working we were working with, I'm assuming it's with a minority-owned organization with a nationally recognized expertise in low-income energy efficiency. They work in Oregon, but have their headquarters in California. What are your thoughts on such a partnership? Thank you, Stephen. I think that the key criteria is that the primary applicant has to be a nonprofit registered within the state. As long as the project itself is investing in, again, if it's an infrastructure project or it's building something, installing something, that's happening within city boundaries. And if it's training people up or educating folks and it's not infrastructure, then that is focused on that it is for Portland residents. It is, I think that the partnership is just fine. I don't think that there's anything. Yeah, and please, Kate, correct me. I'm thinking through our scoring criteria and whether there were originally a lot of questions. There were questions about durability of partnerships, but those didn't end up making it in the final grant application.
Yeah, I think there's nothing in the scoring that would be impacted by that.
Okay, we're going to give this another couple minutes here. I don't want to wind you all down, but if a question comes up, otherwise we may end short and give folks a little extra time and give us a chance to debrief this as well. So. Okay, I just want to thank our captioner Regina as well for being with us here today and captioning this meeting so well. Bye, Jason. Well, this was my restaurant days. We would start flickering the lights a little bit to give folks a signal, but we're not doing that yet.
Yeah. my life.
right. Closing down. Yes, that's the final music.
Yeah.
You don't have to go home. You just have to leave here. But really, any questions? And otherwise, team, let's go ahead and close this down. I will send an invite out for just a quick debrief meeting. Actually, in fact, let's do a debrief just in our staff check-in in a little bit.
Okay.
Sounds good. Right.
Okay.